Welcome to The Naked Entrepreneur, where we shine a light on the stories of innovation and purpose that are shaping our world. Today, we're proud to feature a trailblazer in the beauty industry who's crafted a brand that stands for so much more than just aesthetics. Meet Jenn Harper, the visionary founder of Cheekbone Beauty, a cosmetics company that's making a mark with its high-quality, sustainable products and a mission to empower Indigenous communities. Jenn's journey is one of discovery, healing, and purpose. Driven by her own struggles and the desire to see Indigenous representation in the beauty industry, Jenn created Cheekbone Beauty to give back to her community and to the earth. Cheekbone Beauty is not just about makeup. It's about sustainability with eco-friendly packaging and practices that respect our planet. Through her work, Jenn is breaking barriers, challenging stereotypes, and creating a platform for Indigenous voices and stories to be heard and celebrated. Jenn's commitment extends beyond business, with a portion of profits supporting education and resources for Indigenous youth, embodying the ethos of true beauty from within. Join us now as we dive into the inspiring story of Jenn Harper, a leader, entrepreneur, and advocate who's using beauty as a tool for change and empowerment. Welcome back to The Naked Entrepreneur. I'm Dr. Sean Wise, Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Ted Rogers School of Management here at Toronto Metropolitan University, and today I'm joined by a real inspiration, Jenn Harper from Cheekbone Beauty. Welcome, Jenn.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us. I want to share your story, but we always start at the easiest place to access it, what we call the elevator pitch. So what's the elevator pitch behind Cheekbone Beauty? What problem were you solving? What value do you feel you've transferred?
Yeah, so our elevator pitch has always been this idea about we exist to help Indigenous people see themselves in a brand where they can feel value. And we do that while we're crafting sustainable color cosmetics that won't end up in a landfill. And so we're really proud that we were built on this idea of representation for our community, but we are products for every human being. And what I love is we've been able to authentically, using our Indigenous roots, provide cosmetics that are literally better for people on the planet. Our favorite is obviously the reviews and feedback from the clients, which happened to actually be 95% not Indigenous. But I just read a handwritten thank you note from a customer that struggled with an autoimmune disease their entire life, loves color makeup, and has now been able to wear color makeup again because of our brand. And so I think moments like that really help me see and hopefully our consumers who read our reviews why we stand out and why we're different than what exists in this space. And really a lot of it comes into how we make and create and develop products.
So let's talk about that. How does Cheekbone Beauty aim to aid Indigenous people in seeing themselves authentically?
Yeah, so when it comes to marketing and mainstream media, we use a 95% Indigenous models. And when we do photo shoots, when we have video shoots, all those kinds of things with our brand so that our community absolutely feels seen. We're really open about making sure that we don't always know what Indigenous looks like. So that sort of Hollywood stereotype isn't always what we look like. So we're very open and inclusive in our model selection. And then it's about the next layer, which is the actual products, which are really the heroes here. And it's taking these concepts from Indigenous ways of knowing and being, ancient Indigenous wisdom, and marrying that with Western science in the development of products, and understanding through the views and the teachings of Indigenous people and communities, like thinking about things like the 7-generation teaching, where looking at what we do today and how it impacts not only us, but the next 7 generations. And when we think of taking ingredients, in particular natural ingredients, how do we regenerate? Like, are we just extracting? What are we putting back? What kind of work do we do to ensure responsible sourcing practices, ethical resourcing practices? We actually became a B Corp certified business in 2021 because we really felt the B Corp community aligned with our Indigenous value system. And that meant we then now had a legal obligation to people on the planet before profits. And we believe in that as much as the B Corp community. And it's one of the reasons we chose to do that. And when I was thinking of a lot of times in our space, it's always people are looking for that seal of approval, and in researching it, there's not a lot that hold much weight because sometimes it's just about you writing a check to an organization, and then they will then lend their seal to you. But what I loved about the B Corp community was it took over a year and a half to get that kind of certification, which means the vetting process is not light or easy, and they take their work very seriously, as do we.
And it's continuous. So it's not like once you have it, you can just all of a sudden become an evil conglomerate. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. But you said something, and I want to make sure that people watching know. Your product is for everyone. It follows and is made through an Indigenous wisdom lens, but anyone can buy and use your product. You don't just focus on one customer demographic.
No, absolutely. Interesting thing that I've learned about shade and shade ranges is one, Indigenous people come in all shades and shade ranges, as does the human family. And so that worked out really well. But I mean, what a crazy category. We didn't launch any complexion products until the last couple of years, because it's such an insane category. And I know why many brands save that for much later in their brand growth, because you can imagine now, I think organizations like Fenty are like, it's table stakes to have like 60 shades, right? And then now think from a SKU perspective on the shelf, minimum quantity orders from your manufacturer, like the cost is just like going up and up. And so as a scrappy entrepreneur, that's something that we definitely couldn't play in straight away. And we were really trying to figure out, how does shade work? And we dabbled in this space with our Unify multi pencils, creating a product that's not a white base, which when you use clear bases in beauty formulations, and then you're not leaving ashy white undertones for people of color on their skin. And so it's really interesting the amount of knowledge I now have in shade range.
Well, it definitely seems like you're gaining wisdom and knowledge from all places. I want to talk a little bit about incorporating Indigenous wisdom. You mentioned just a moment ago the seventh generation principle. I've heard you talk about the seven grandfather teachings. Can you elaborate on how these teachings are embedded in Cheekbone Beauty's operations and their decision making and their culture?
Yeah. So the seven grandfather teachings we have turned into our core values. Two that I love to speak about are just love and humility. Within an organization, it's really interesting. And as we grew with people, I really recognized, as the team grows, you really need to figure out a culture. And once you do that, it's so much easier as the leader to say, look, like, this is our culture here at Cheekbone Beauty. If this is an issue and we're having a problem, one, share with me why. But we really support this concept of humility, recognizing what we don't know as individuals. And then, that actually, the moment that sort of conversation happens, we then remove ego, which is a big problem in a lot of workplaces, right? Like, we all think we know everything, and we certainly don't. And I'm really trying to push this idea to our team on the regular, that like, there's somebody that knows something that you don't, and it could be somebody in any position of the company, or any one of our vending partners or business partners know things that we don't. And so we really got to be humble as a group, as an organization. And because we're in this space of sustainability, it's also really important to really look and use our critical thinking as we're developing and growing. And we are big on integrity, which is part of like truth and honesty, which are part of the seven grandfather teachings. And so, some of our partners have, there's been suggestions and things weaved in that we could possibly do. And those are just things we would never do. And so I think when you have a strong set of values and principles, and it's embedded into the early days of the organization, along with the founder, and then the team that's coming up and growing in within that culture, it's so much easier to make decisions, because we all know right away what we will and will not do, because it's clear in our values and principles.
We're going to talk about sustainability, but before that, I want to go back to an earlier point you mentioned around growth. Even if you get it right at a founder level, at a starting point, and a company does as well as yours, there's growth and there's pressure on growth. And so my question is what are some of the challenges that you face personally and as a company in transitioning from a small business into truly a global business in the making?
Yeah, being a little bit delusional in the sort of scaling phase, honestly, in the early days, really hired too many people too early. But that's always such a hard moment because you're growing and you think you need this. And then the business can become a little bit stagnant or stale. We went through a pandemic, like there was a lot of things that happened. And so,
Premature scaling, which is where you grow, in advance of when you should grow, is such a classic entrepreneurial problem because your ambition wants you to get big, and being successful means keeping control. So let's get back into that. What were the challenges for you?
yeah, so when you do have too many people, then it becomes a situation of, okay, you have to let people go, which is always a painful part of any organization. And then really recognizing, okay, we've scaled, and then reprioritizing our goals as a business. And that became in this last year like healthy profitability. Like that is
Okay.
all I think I repeat that daily on my morning routine to myself. It's on all of my personal vision boards. It's just like healthy, profitable business. And so healthy can mean a lot of things. It's the team, it's the organization, it's the business operationally, having all of the processes in place. We launched an ERP system last year, and it's made things incredibly easy in some areas, and then figured out a lot of areas for change in different areas. And so it's been good in many cases for us as a small business. I think inventory, when you're a CPG business, is the biggest challenge. But now with an ERP system, I feel like finally we have like this live number that's real of what we actually have on hand, which was very exciting. And so it's things. Yeah, it's just this struggle of trying to have the right amount of people at all the moments, right? And learned that too many is actually not a good thing either when you think you might need them. So really learning to be lean and mean with a really small team right now. Economically speaking, 2023 was not the best year, I think, for a lot of e-commerce businesses. Yes, our retail business did well, and we were doing things good and growing in that direction, but we had to really readjust our strategic plans for our e-commerce space. And finally, I feel like we're getting back to growth in that area as well. But it's so interesting, and it's like, as a small team, you cannot, and you hear this all the time, physically and humanly impossible for us to focus on too many things at once. And retail and e-commerce are two different worlds. And then we were focused far too heavily on that retail space last year, but not strategically on our e-commerce plan. And so we really saw that fall, as much as it was a global thing, because I think every e-commerce person I know and talk to and friend in the space is like, yeah, it's a horrible, no one knows what's happening. Yeah, so being a small team trying to figure out both, very challenging. And then for us, learning the retail world, like this is a whole new way of operating. We're now sort of beholden to these partners. They're in control, they hold all the power. So, how do we play the way they like to play? And we're in two different big organizations. And so, it's learning an actual culture and a language. So, we have our own Cheekbone culture, and now we have to learn those with, as an early founder that's never been in retail, or I've never worked in retail. I had no experience in this space. And so, for me, this has been the biggest learning curve, that a product is not going to land on the shelf and sell itself, and nor is it the responsibility. And I had to be honest with myself about this. Is it the responsibility of the retailer to make that sell? Unless, of course, you have some major marketing initiatives and agreements. But when those aren't in place, you're the brand, your product's on the shelf. Now we figure out how to sell it from there.
And one of the things you had to also figure out with growth is money.
You're gonna always finance, and I don't know any entrepreneur that has more than they need.
No.
I know you came to Dragon's Den and you were looking for money, but I also know that you were able to tap into a source that not many people can. So can you tell us about your experience with Raven Capital and how it might have impacted your journey and how that sat with you, letting someone else own and influence your business?
Yeah, capital and partnerships, when it comes to money, it's always very interesting. I do recognize and am very aware that I was never going to get money from anywhere else. Like when I legit like this, everything is about a commercial um has a commercial relationship added to it when we're in this space. And if I didn't have any experience in those spaces, there's no bank, there's no VC, there's nobody was going to give this person money to do what I was doing, no experience in that area. And so I believe that I am extremely lucky, but because of how hard I work. And I'm grateful. And then I also recognize that this business would not be the way it is without their capital. So it had to be. There was no other way, right? And so, but the moment you work with any sort of capital, there's the return. Like this isn't a loan, this wasn't a grant. So there's we've been yeah, they want to get paid at some point. And so yeah, that's the part of growth. And when we just said a tough year means tough conversations and where are we going and how it's growing. And so yeah, and it's so interesting because this, to them, it's not their third baby, but to me it is, right? And so it's a whole new relationship and it's figuring out how it works. We did have some really important conversations in the early days, which I highly recommend to every entrepreneur. What happens if this, like those what if scenarios, right? And they are with us till the end, which is great to know, like whatever that situation looks like. But it's money conversations. I don't know. I feel like it's not just me. I've talked to many people. Like they're always so hard, and things are awesome when everything's going great, but when they're not, it's tougher conversations. But you as an entrepreneur and anyone that chooses to take someone's money, and I knew this I guess intensely, that I have this huge weight on my shoulders, which is this fiduciary responsibility to make them their money back and more if that was our relationship, right? And so, yeah, my husband said this last 6 months, you're very snappy. And I was like, okay, you don't know what I'm doing all the time during the day. Or it's a lot of pressure when you're
Well, you also have staff and mortgages and things to look after and people relying on you. And now you've got customers who love your product. So they don't want to find out someone else if that doesn't work out. But
exactly.
I think learning and adapting is a real key to sustainability in the business sense of the word.
Absolutely.
But you know a lot about sustainability. I mean, you've implemented your product conception all the way to end of life. So how does sustainability integrate with your own Indigenous values?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, as a young person, I have always been, I think, just obsessed, or I don't know what the right word is, like things like how and where things were made and what I was using really mattered to me. Even at such a young age, I would really pay attention to those things. And so throughout my career, I was in seafood for the 8 years prior to launching Cheekbone. I would be heavily focused on the sustainable seafood world. I could get into loads of conversations of how that worked, but these things were always very important to me. And I recognize that this is innate in my community. When I think of how my dad talks about nature and all living things, and we are in relationship with all of this, and how important this gift of this planet is. And I am just in awe every time I step into nature, even in the winter. Like my morning walk, I'm always just started off with such gratitude because you see these little tiny birds. It's the winter time. They're eating breakfast. Like, the creator of this beautiful planet, this universe, has provided food for this little tiny animal in like the dead of winter, despite it looking gray and stark. And we've had how many months of the grayness here, but it's just so fascinating to me that those beautiful things happen for us. And we know the sunshine will come back. It finally has. Like, we know it's the sun will shine again and all of those things. And so just, I think that gratitude and being raised with this appreciation of these beautiful things and that they were designed and made perfectly for us. And I love the quote I remember from Tecumseh, who was a chief, and it was in the early days of the inception of America. And he's having like a meeting with the leaders, and he was like, they tried to give him a chair. And he was like, no, I'm going to sit on the breast of my mother. And I was just like, it's so interesting to me, like that's just how Native people feel. So like this planet is like their mother, right? Like this is nurturing them. This is making us all whole, and we have this innate desire and this I think this idea of protecting it at all costs, if you will. And so, as the founder of a brand that's putting products in the world, which I've said the world didn't need another lipstick brand, and I had to sit with the weight as well of like, are we doing the right thing? But I really believe as a small indie brand, we can push change, because once the consumer figures out there's a better way to do something, they will then push the conglomerates to do or make change. And maybe they're not paying, like we're so small and minute, maybe nobody even knows what we're doing. But hopefully, as we grow our customer base and they get louder, that could send messages in the right direction to help people see there's different ways of doing things.
Well, let's focus on that for a second. You know, you've talked about your personal experiences and your dad and how your roots influenced your dedication to this way of business. But now you've gotten into bed with Sephora, which is a large multinational company and has lots of moving parts and lots of priorities. How does one in your position influence upwards so that you're not only conforming to them, but they're opening to the wonder that is also you? How do you make that balance in a relationship like that work when one of you is David and the other is Goliath?
Yeah, that's a great analogy for it, for sure, because that's how it really does feel. And we're still trying to figure that out. I've learned a lot about the retail space in the last few years, and in particular, the culture and the language. And, if you really do things the way, when I said we had to learn their culture, we really did. And if we do, and if we play in, all of the programming and plans that these organizations have and want, you are in a better position to shine a light on the work that you're doing or your brand and build and foster these beautiful relationships. And one thing I recognize as being literally the first Indigenous brand that Sephora has ever worked with is I hold a huge responsibility to make sure that the path I create is a beautiful relationship, in the sense I do not ever want to ruin it for anyone that comes behind me. And so how I operate is really, really important, despite not always being probably like every entrepreneur. They're not doing it my way. But then I had to recognize, like, okay, like drink your own tea. We talk about humility. Let me look at things their way. And this is their objective, is to get products off the shelf. Now, how are we at Cheekbone Beauty going to help them pump Cheekbone Beauty products off that shelf? And what are we going to do differently if this didn't work? If this didn't work, what do we have to do? And really take responsibility for that. And I want them to see that we made changes. We've listened to their suggestions. We're playing in, like, right. And so again, it's really about leaving the path a good place for the next generation. And to me, then I'll be staying true to my culture.
You've talked a little bit about how strategy and the core values are impacted by Indigenous principles, but what about the practical stuff? How do these principles followed on a daily basis? Can you give us examples that we might not be aware of, so that we can see that this wisdom doesn't only apply on the macro, it applies on the micro as well?
Yeah, so when we have issues with products, we're really open about it. So if something happens, we are really transparent. We've pulled products. We've had to, in particular with our lipstick in the early days, we had struggles with it in terms of the formulation. When you're using more naturally derived ingredients, it is really hard to get a long shelf life on that, obviously, because you've taken away a lot of the preservatives that give a lipstick a really long shelf life. And so just being really open and honest, like in that, sometimes a business wouldn't call people back or say, look, we're not selling this right now, or you bought this and we want to take it back and send you something else. Um, Anytime anyone has an issue with a product, any issue at all, we are here to fix it, and want people to be absolutely 100% happy with their product. We offer like a 100% guarantee if they're not, right? So things like that, where we're just really true to doing what we say we're going to do. I've seen a lot of people say they're doing things and we know they're not. And so even just with our giving and our scholarship fund, we've always said we're a brand that is really about making this social impact and having this give back as a port up. And there could have been times, there's people in our circles and in our spaces right now like, do you have to do this right now? Is this a good time? And I'm like, this is the only reason we exist, and if we're not doing this, then I'm not doing this brand. Like, that's just period. Like, giving back the scholarship fund, the 1% for the planet, that is who we are. That is part of it. There's no reason for us not to do that. And if it's like about an extra few points of margin, really, are we really having, like, that's not what this business is. And I had some interesting conversations actually earlier today, because we're really trying to think about, as Indigenous women entrepreneurs, we say we want these new systems built. Is there really a real Indigenous way of doing business, or are we just softening or mimicking the regular VC world when it comes to capital and deploying it, or when it comes to business and operations? And how do we really build a new model? And that's still an open-ended question. Like, we don't have a full answer yet. I firmly believe that historically, when trade was happening here in North America with our people, that they were doing things that was about lending and giving back. And our people did not document. There was a lot of oral passing on of information. And I really wish, I was like, why did no one document how they were trading fur and what was happening there? And how can we like take that and use some of those models? And was it a longer return time, right? Like, because people are more forgiving. And was it, I'll give you this instead of this, right? And can we come to some formal different kind of agreement from our original one? Which is really, in these are not like the models that we work under today. And so how can we really change these models? And I think for many of us as Indigenous entrepreneurs, we're still in this space where we're really trying to figure it out and make that work.
I think you're right. You've really been great sharing your past, and now I want to turn our minds to your future. Looking ahead, what are your aspirations for Cheekbone Beauty in the terms of growth, in the terms of impact on the community, or even the contribution to this broader narrative of sustainable and socially responsible business?
Yeah, I've made some bold statements in the past, and I really do want Cheekbone to be a global brand. And I still stand by those statements for sure. But I really recognize now how long of a game this is. Like, this isn't going to happen overnight. We're in this for the long haul. In my heart, would love to see our products in New Zealand, in Australia, in Europe, and really want Indigenous people, no matter where they are in the world, to recognize that someone like them, who came from a community maybe like they did, built this brand, and that to be globally known, that like an Indigenous person built a global brand. Because I believe that can be extremely empowering and uplifting to our communities, and feed this fire of entrepreneurship that is going through our communities. And we know what entrepreneurship can economically do in terms of sustaining us for future and future generations, and community growth, and all of those wonderful things that come with that. And so that's where I see the brand growing. But we are, I'm taking more of a a smaller view, and then, flying out sometimes to see that big picture and envision those bold, big moves in my mind, but then really honing in, like, quarter by quarter, year by year, where are we? What are we doing?
Well, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a few years now, and I can say with 100% certainty the best is yet to come. I think that the hard work that you've been putting in is only now starting to reap the big rewards, and I'm just so excited for what will come next for you and for those that you are trailblazing for. I want to thank you for talking on The Naked Entrepreneur. I'm Dr. Sean Wise. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.